When an INFJ falls in love, they give their whole heart. But when that love breaks, it isn't just sadness they feel. It's a deep, spiritual unraveling that touches every layer of who they are. In this video, we'll go into what really happens when an INFJ gets heartbroken. In the beginning, the INFJ usually tries to stay composed. They internalize everything. Outwardly, they may appear calm, even detached, as if they've accepted what happened. But inside, they are quietly bleeding. Their first instinct is not to lash out or blame. Instead, they overanalyze the situation, replaying every conversation, every look, every silence, trying to understand where things went wrong. It's not because they want to reopen the wound, but because INFJs believe understanding brings peace. They crave closure that feels emotionally and morally coherent. The problem is, closure rarely comes cleanly. And so they linger in that space between knowing and not knowing, between acceptance and resistance. Immediately after a heartbreak, an INFJ's mind becomes both their greatest ally and their worst enemy. Their powerful intuition constantly digs beneath the surface, reading meanings into actions and trying to piece together the unseen reasons for the heartbreak. They wonder if they missed the signs, if they were too giving, too trusting, too idealistic. And because they are empathic by nature, they often shoulder the emotional responsibility of both sides. They'll justify the other person's actions, downplay their own pain, and silently forgive long before they've healed. It's an attempt to preserve some sense of goodness in the story, even when it's over. But when that idealistic shield finally cracks, the real pain sets in. INFJs don't just lose a person, they lose the dream they built around that person. They had envisioned a future filled with shared growth, meaning, and emotional depth. When that vision dies, it's like watching a star burn out. They retreat into solitude because the outer world feels too loud, too shallow, too indifferent to the depth of what they're feeling. This withdrawal isn't about self-pity, it's about emotional survival. INFJs need space to process the storm within. They'll spend long hours reflecting, journaling, listening to melancholic music, or staring at the ceiling as waves of nostalgia crash over them. Their dreams often become haunted by memories. Small triggers, a scent, a song, a phrase, can reopen old wounds. Yet even their lowest moments, INFJs rarely lose their faith in love itself. They might lose faith in people, yes, but deep down, they still believe in love's purity. What hurts them most is not the loss, but the betrayal of meaning, the fact that something they held sacred could break so easily. That realization scars them in ways invisible to others. They might experience what can only be called an emotional rebirth. The heartbreak forces them to confront parts of themselves they had hidden behind love. Their insecurities, their overgiving tendencies, their desire to fix and heal others at their own expense. They begin to see how much energy they poured into someone who couldn't match their emotional depth. It's a painful clarity, but also a necessary one. Slowly, they learn to rebuild their emotional boundaries, not walls, but filters that help them discern who truly deserves access to their inner world. Despite their quiet strength, INFJs take a long time to heal. They don't rebound quickly or distract themselves with shallow connections. Instead, they go inward, sometimes disappearing from social life entirely. Friends might find them distant or hard to reach, but that solitude is part of their recovery ritual. Within that space, they begin to reconstruct meaning through art, writing, spirituality, or personal transformation. Heartbreak often becomes the soil in which they grow their deepest wisdom. They emerge softer yet stronger, more intuitive yet less naive. Still, a trace of the pain always remains. INFJs never forget those they once loved. Even after forgiveness, even after time dulls the edges, the memory lingers like a faded tattoo on the soul. They might think of that person years later with quiet sadness or gratitude, depending on how the story ended. But one thing is certain, when an INFJ heals, they don't become bitter. They become wiser, more discerning, and even more compassionate toward others who have suffered loss. And yet, there's a subtle transformation that happens deep inside them. The heartbreak changes how they love. They become more guarded with their emotional investment, not because they've stopped believing in love, but because they've learned that not everyone can meet them on that profound level. The next time they fall in love, they do so more consciously, with awareness of their own worth and the need for balance. They no longer try to rescue or fix anyone. They seek mutual understanding, reciprocity, and emotional maturity. When an INFJ gets heartbroken, the experience becomes part of their story, a quiet, sacred scar that reminds them of what it means to feel deeply and love authentically. They might cry in silence, pray for healing, write poems in the dark, or walk beneath the stars asking God for peace. But they always rise. They transmute pain into wisdom, heartbreak into empathy, and loss into creative expression. Their healing isn't loud. It's luminous, like the slow dawn after a long night. For the INFJ, heartbreak is never just an ending. It's a transformation, a soul passage through which they rediscover their own power, sensitivity, and unbreakable hope. And though they may love differently afterward, they will always love deeply. Because even in pain, they understand that to feel is to live, and to love, despite the risk, is the bravest act of all. After an INFJ has survived the pain of heartbreak and begun to rise again, something subtle but profound happens within them. Their emotional landscape changes. It's as though their heart, once an open field of sunlight and wildflowers, now carries quiet forests, secret paths, and ancient trees, beautiful, but harder to enter. They don't lose their capacity for love. Instead, they begin to love differently, with deeper awareness and a quiet sense of guarded grace. They have learned that not every connection deserves the sacred depth of their soul. In the aftermath, INFJs often go through a period of spiritual searching. Heartbreak shakes their inner foundation so deeply that it triggers questions about purpose, destiny, and divine alignment. They start to see love as a teacher rather than just an emotion. They ask themselves, what was this pain meant to show me? What part of myself was I ignoring? What truth did I refuse to see while I was in love? For the INFJ, emotional pain isn't wasted. It becomes material for growth, transformation, and spiritual refinement. They start to connect the dots between the heartbreak and their soul's evolution, and that reflection brings meaning to their suffering. However, even as they move forward, they often experience emotional aftershocks. There are moments when they suddenly feel the ghost of that old love, not necessarily in sadness, but in flashes, dreams, scents, half-remembered laughter. These memories don't haunt them. Instead, they remind them of how deeply they once felt and how far they've come. The INFJ's memory is long and sentimental. They never truly erase someone who once mattered, but they learn to keep those memories as soft echoes in their heart rather than heavy chains around it. One thing that often changes is their relationship with vulnerability. Before heartbreak, an INFJ may have given themselves completely, trusting with an open spirit, believing that love will protect itself through purity of intention. After heartbreak, they realize that love, no matter how genuine, needs boundaries. They start to measure emotional reciprocity before diving in. They listen more to actions than to words. They no longer confuse emotional intensity with emotional safety. That's a major shift because for INFJs, emotional connection once felt like destiny. Now, it feels like a sacred contract that must be honored equally by both sides. Their intuition also sharpens after heartbreak. They become more discerning about the energy of people. They can sense red flags earlier, notice inconsistencies in tone or behavior, and pick up subtle emotional cues that others overlook. This heightened awareness isn't paranoia. It's emotional intelligence evolved through pain. They may even develop a sort of empathic radar for sincerity, recognizing the difference between someone who understands them and someone who merely admires them. Despite this wisdom, INFJs sometimes struggle with emotional numbness for a while. After giving so much and being hurt so deeply, their heart instinctively shuts down to protect itself. They might find it difficult to connect romantically, even if someone wonderful comes along. This phase isn't coldness, it's self-preservation. Their emotions run so deep that they need time to trust the idea of intimacy again. It can take months or even years before they can let someone in at the same level. During this time, they often channel their energy into creativity, service, or personal growth. Art, writing, mentoring others. These become safe ways to love again, indirectly. Many INFJs, after heartbreak, experience what could be called a phoenix stage. Once the ashes of their pain settle, they rise with new purpose. Their compassion becomes deeper. They start using their story to inspire others, often becoming silent healers. They understand emotional suffering in a way that makes them extraordinary listeners and comforters. Their pain becomes their empathy. They know how to sit with others in silence, offering warmth without judgment, because they've been there. They've tasted heartbreak so completely that they know how to guide others through it. Interestingly, INFJs rarely seek revenge or validation after being heartbroken. Their quiet dignity won't allow it. But deep inside, they often feel a quiet satisfaction in outgrowing the pain. Their healing isn't about proving their worth. It's about remembering it. The more they grow, the more they realize that the heartbreak didn't diminish their light. It merely refined it. They start to see love not as something that defines them, but as something that flows from them when they are whole. Yet, there's still a tender fragility beneath that wisdom. Even after healing, the INFJ can sometimes revisit the past in moments of introspection, not because they want it back, but because they wonder what it taught them about themselves. They might find poetry in their pain, beauty in their scars, and meaning in their loss. That's the paradox of the INFJ heart. It breaks deeply, but it also transforms deeply. When love does come again, the INFJ approaches it differently. They no longer rush to merge souls. They observe, they listen, they allow time to reveal truth. They have learned that real love isn't found in the fireworks of emotion, but in the steady flame of consistency. They seek peace over passion, honesty over perfection, and alignment over fantasy. The next person they love will meet a wiser, more grounded INFJ, one who still feels everything deeply, but with self-awareness as their compass. And perhaps the most remarkable transformation of all is that the INFJ no longer fears heartbreak. They've walked through its fire and discovered that pain does not destroy them. It purifies them. They've learned that love, even when it ends, was never a mistake. It was a chapter in the unfolding story of their soul. To an INFJ, every heartbreak becomes a bridge toward a higher understanding of what love truly means: self-respect, empathy, and faith that even shattered hearts can still glow. So, when an INFJ gets heartbroken, it's not the end of their story. It's the sacred rewriting of it. They emerge quieter, wiser, and more luminous, like someone who has walked through darkness and now carries light from the other side. Another profound change that happens to an INFJ after heartbreak is the recalibration of their inner world. Before, their love might have been outwardly focused, pouring constantly into others, trying to nurture, heal, and protect. But after heartbreak, that love begins to turn inward. They start learning how to love themselves with the same depth and tenderness they once reserved for someone else. It doesn't happen overnight. It begins with small acts, choosing solitude over forced connection, setting boundaries without guilt, saying no without apology, and allowing themselves to rest without needing permission. Slowly, they start realizing that they are also worthy of the same compassion they endlessly give. This inward journey awakens a kind of creative renaissance in the INFJ. Because their emotions run so deep, they often transform pain into art, philosophy, writing, or spiritual practice. The heartbreak gives birth to something beautiful, a new vision, a project, a calling. It becomes the raw material for their self-expression. Many INFJs find their purpose through heartbreak. They write stories, teach lessons, mentor others, or create movements that come from the wisdom of their pain. In a strange way, heartbreak becomes the doorway to destiny. Emotionally, they also develop a new relationship with silence. Where once silence felt heavy and lonely, now it becomes sacred. It's in silence that they find clarity. They stop needing constant reassurance or validation from others, because they've learned to listen to their own intuition. This solitude becomes a healing temple, a space where they meet their higher self. They begin to feel at home in their own company, finding strength in their own energy rather than depending on someone else to complete them. As their self-awareness deepens, INFJs often experience what could be described as emotional detachment, but it's not coldness. It's calm clarity. They can see people for who they are without trying to fix or change them. They no longer chase potential. They honor reality. Before heartbreak, they might have loved people's possibilities. After heartbreak, they love people's truth, the flaws, the limits, the humanness. They stop trying to heal others at the expense of themselves. This is when their empathy finally finds balance with self-respect. The INFJ's spiritual sensitivity also heightens during this phase. Many begin to perceive heartbreak not just as a random emotional event, but as divine orchestration, a soul lesson. They come to understand that some people enter their lives not to stay, but to awaken something within them. They start trusting divine timing more, seeing the pattern of endings and beginnings as a spiritual rhythm rather than punishment. This surrender brings peace. They stop clinging to what's gone and start aligning with what's meant for them. And yet, even with all this transformation, the INFJ heart never becomes hard. They may have boundaries now, but their soul remains tender. They might smile differently, quieter, more knowing, with traces of pain hidden behind grace, but they still radiate warmth. They still believe in connection, though now with eyes wide open. When they meet someone new, they no longer hand over the keys to their heart immediately. They open the door slowly, listening not just to words, but to energy, consistency, and integrity. They've learned that real love must be mutual in depth and intention. Another subtle change that occurs is how INFJs perceive loss itself. Before heartbreak, they might have feared endings. Afterward, they see them as sacred transitions. They begin to accept impermanence as part of beauty. They understand that love doesn't have to last forever to be meaningful. Some loves come to shape you, others to shake you, and both are gifts. This acceptance softens their grief and allows them to carry gratitude where there once was sorrow. Eventually, many INFJs reach a stage where they begin to forgive not only the person who hurt them, but also themselves, for ignoring red flags, for loving too deeply, for holding on too long. This self-forgiveness is liberating. It breaks the cycle of self-blame and shame that often follows heartbreak. They start realizing that they were not foolish for loving the way they did. They were simply true. Their authenticity was never the problem. It just meant the wrong timing or the wrong heart. From there, their entire approach to life changes. They begin to live slower, more deliberately. They stop chasing what's not aligned and instead attract what resonates. Their intuition, sharpened by pain, becomes their compass. They start saying yes only to things and people that bring peace, not chaos. This alignment makes them more magnetic, more luminous, more self-assured. The very heartbreak that once broke them becomes the force that shapes their higher self. And when love finds them again, and it will, it's different. It's quieter, safer, more grounded. It's not about filling a void anymore. It's about sharing fullness. The INFJ no longer confuses intensity with intimacy. They choose relationships that feels like home, not battlefield. Their heart, once fragile, now beats with quiet strength, carrying the wisdom of both pain and peace.